Okay, so for this last discussion point for this course is the oligopoly. And so I'm kind of faced with a choice here of what do I want to do. There are two chapters that were originally designed to deal with this that I thought we would cover here, Chapter 9 and Chapter 10. But I'm kind of thinking now that we might not have enough time to do both of them. I mean, on some level, they're both important in different ways. But I'm gonna make a decision here, an executive decision here, right in front of you, right at this moment. We're gonna focus more on Chapter 10 because what it does is it gets a little bit more into how manager specifically would deal if you were a manager at an oligopoly, how you would deal, how you would make decisions in a game theoretic standpoint. That means making decisions knowing that others are making decisions in their best interest. This chapter is useful if I'm training you to be an economist, which I am not trying to do in this course. I'm trying to at least give you economic tools that you can use as a manager, which is why I'm going to focus on 10. Okay. So I will end up deleting Chapter 9 from the syllabus. So let's talk about this last chapter then. Game theory largely comes about after World War II. If you saw the movie Beautiful Mind, that was essentially a story about game theory. John Nash, who actually tragically died in a car accident in New Jersey, taxi cab driver just was driving crazy, and he and his wife died, and really sad story. Why should we care about John Nash? Nash, who did win the Nobel Prize in economics, even though he's trained as a mathematician, he won the Nobel Prize in economics for developing game theory. And it basically, again, is making optimal decisions, which you would do as the manager, when others are doing the same thing. And it matters, the outcome is dependent upon what the others are deciding. So if you saw the Beautiful Mind movie, this would be the scene where they're at a bar and these guys all want to they want to hook up with this one woman at the bar, and John Nash realizes, okay, well, if all the guys try to go after this one woman, only one of them is going to get her, and maybe none of them will get her. I'm trying to think here, like, the idea of that was if they all ended up going with one of her friends, right, that they all decided to dance with one of her friends, they would each individually benefit from that. But the only reason why they would pick these other women, which would, in this movie, are considered the second choice, the only reason why they would do that is because they all know they can't get the one woman, the one that's deemed the prettiest. So they go with their friends that are deemed a little bit uglier. Why would they accept that little bit less? Because the worst situation is they get no one. Right? No one to dance with. Because it's the 1950s, and that's what people do at bars. People dance at bars. Okay. So, we're just going to be looking at lots of games here. If you like chess, if you like checkers, even if you like Connect 4, this kind of thing is really cool about thinking about these kinds of things, which is also why it's incredibly horrible idea to play board games with economists, because all we think about are these game theories. So we're going to look at lots of different kinds of games here. We're going to look at games that are simultaneous moved one-shot games, games that are repeated an infinite number of times, games that are repeated a finite number of times, either with a known number of finite times or an unknown period of finite times, and then games that appear over multiple stages. Okay, so we obviously didn't talk about 9, but we have this idea that oligopolies are when there's generally 5 to 8 firms, and these 5 to 8 firms that are in this oligopoly, they could be selling a differentiated good or not, but they're making their pricing decision and their output decision based on game theory. So the price decision, output decision, advertising decision all depend on the solutions to these games. This strategic thinking then is all what's being generalized under game theory. Managers, that would be you, have to then, when they're thinking about things in terms of game theory, they're thinking about things in terms of how does my decision, how does that impact my competitors and what they decide to do. So what do we need in a game? The game is going to have the players or the agents. These are the ones that are making the decisions. They need to have a strategy, what they intend to do. We then need to know the payoff. What are they going to get from following a certain strategy? And then we have to have some idea, like, are they going to play in a particular order? Are they going to interact in some way or not? That's all going to affect how games, what the output of the game is going to be. Like, how could it be different? The game could be different if it's a simultaneous move game. Games where, like paper, rock, scissors would be an example of a simultaneous move game, right? I don't know what the other player is going to decide. We do, 1, 2, 3, right? And then we all show a paper, a rock, or a scissor, right? And then one wins. Or sequential moves. Sequential moves would be like chess, checkers, Connect 4, Battleship. Right? These would all be one player plays and then the other player plays, and you adjust your thinking then based on what people decide to do. In terms of the interaction, we then have to think about, okay, is this game just going to be played once, or if the game is being played multiple times, then the outcomes of previous games are going to impact how I play in this game. And if I know the game is going to occur in the future, that's going to impact my decisions today in this game, in this current iteration of the game. When we think about these games as the one-shot game, the paper, rock, scissors kind of thing, is that we need to think about these games then. The decision point is only the one point at which it's played. I don't have to then take into account as much the thinking of the other player, because I won't really know what it is. And this game being played just one time, if it's a simultaneous game being played just once, I don't even need to take into account what the other player is going to decide to do. But on the other hand, I could play just one game of chess, and in that one game of chess, again, I'm not thinking in terms of like what's my reputation going to be or anything like that. I know I'm just playing the game once. The strategies are then going to look different. If we look at this in terms of a normal form game, here I've got my two players, player A, player B. Here are their two possible strategies: go up or down, left or right. Okay, so we're saying here that player A can choose up or down. Player B can choose left or right. And then depending on where they are, these are the payoffs, all the possible payoffs. So of these two possible decisions, there are 4 possible outcomes. The numbers within these are the payoffs of each of these. These could be profit levels or some other kind of benefit that they receive from doing something. So if player B chooses left, player A chooses down, then player A will get -10, player B will get 7. And so on and so forth. That's how you would read this this type of simultaneous move one-shot game. Playing paper, rocks, and scissors one time. Could have these 4 possible outcomes. When we think about the strategies for the simultaneous move one-shot game, well, we could think about having a dominant strategy. we could just say that no matter what, I always pick rock, or I always pick paper. Right? What makes paper, rocks, and scissors so fun is that, right, there is no real dominant strategy. I can't say I always play paper, because then if I'm known as the paper guy, right, someone's always going to pick scissors, right? And rock, right? If I'm the rock guy, because I think rock crushes scissors, right? Well, paper covers rock. Right, so what's cool about those kinds of games is that there's no dominant strategy necessarily. Right, and if the game is played just one time, it's kind of cool because you're just choosing something at random. There's no such thing as a professional paper, rock, scissors player because there's not a lot to really think about in that case. Now, you could, personally have a dominant strategy, but it wouldn't make a lot of sense. In this case, well, for paper, rocks, and scissors. In this case here, it will be clear that there is a dominant strategy. So how do we find the dominant strategy? The dominant strategy is found by saying to someone, what would you choose to do depending on what the other player decides to do? So if player B chooses to go left, what will player A do? Would player A want to earn 10 or negative 10? They'd probably want to earn 10, right? So presuming this is a good thing. If player B chooses right, would they want to earn 10 or 15? They'd want to earn 15. Regardless of what player B decides, player A always chooses up. That's the dominant strategy. Now let's look at it from player B's perspective. Let's find their dominant strategy. If player A chooses up, will player B want 20 or 8? They'll want 20. If player A chooses down, will they want 7 or 10? They would want 10. Player B doesn't have a dominant strategy because there is nothing that they will choose to do regardless of what player A does. But player A does have a dominant strategy because there is something that they will always do. They will always choose up regardless of what player B does. So player A can be known as the up guy because that's what they do. They always choose up. Player B, we don't know what they're going to decide because they're always going to have a different strategy here. Now you could play it safe. You could have a secure strategy. And in the secure strategy here, what we're saying here is that the player wants to at least get a certain amount of a payoff, right? And they could say, I'm going to choose up. Because if I choose up, at least I will at least get, in this case here, a payoff of at least 10. If I choose, right, and that's the best case scenario, because if I choose down, I could have as much as a 10 loss. As for player B, their secure strategy would be to choose right, because at least if they choose right, they're guaranteed to earn at least 8, whereas here they would have earned at least 7. So here we're just trying to, play it safe, basically. Playing it safe, the secure strategy. You're comparing the outcomes and seeing which one has, I guess, the smallest. I shouldn't say I guess. You're looking for the one that has the highest amount that would be obtained, even if you lost. And in this case, for player A, choosing up, player B, choosing right. Now we get to the Nash Equilibrium. And in the Nash Equilibrium, what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, based on what these players decide, we're looking for what will each player decide to do, knowing that the other player is doing what's in their own best interest. In this case here, that when in terms of the Nash Equilibrium, is that we have to find kind of like what is player A's dominant strategy. Their dominant strategy, let's find it here. If player B chooses left, then would they want 10 or negative 10? They would want 10. If player B chooses right, would they want 15 or 10? they would choose 15. Their dominant strategy is up. If player A chooses up, would they want 20 or 8? They would want 20. If player A chooses down, would they want 7 or 10? Again, they would want 10. Player A does have a dominant strategy of playing up. Now, this is what we're saying, though, about Nash equilibriums. For Nash equilibriums, what we're saying is that player B knows that player A is going to always choose up. So because player A is always going to choose up, player B is going to choose left. So what we're saying here is player B chooses left because they know player A will always choose up. And that's what makes it a Nash, because B is making an informed decision because they know something else is going to happen, how the other player is going to act. Why should we care? From a managerial perspective, we would care about this because what this means then is that I can make my pricing decisions then. I can make pricing decisions based on what I think others are going to do. If I say low prices always, right? If my competitor is saying low prices always, I have to now find a way to compete against that. Am I going to try to match them in price, or am I just going to say, I have a different type of business. I don't match prices. Right? In this case here, if they both charge the low price, they match each other's price. The Nash equilibrium, the non-cooperative Nash equilibrium, which is both of them charging the low price, if that's both their dominant strategy, it's actually inferior. They would be better off both agreeing to charge the high price. They could earn a joint profit that's higher. But what's the problem? This is a better equilibrium, but it's not stable. It's not stable because when they're both charging a high price, firm A faces an incentive to defect. In other words, to do something other than what they promised. Because if they're here and player A and B are both charging a high price, firm A can say, you know what, I'm going to just all of a sudden lower my price. And they're going to get then all the profits. And player B is going to be hurt significantly. Player B could do the same thing. Player B could also defect. Causing, right, just kind of reverse here. They would make all the money. And so they end up having to both agree to be mutually grumpy and be a non-cooperative Nash equilibrium. There's our dilemma for you as a manager then. You could either work to reduce the defections, or you could work with your competitors, but that's kind of illegal. Or you just exist in this situation, which is bad actually for shareholders. And you see this kind of thing here as well, that we can change the equilibrium. You see this, you'll see this example in the book. You change this if you allow the players to communicate with each other. If the government says, no, you can't charge a certain price, only certain prices can be charged here. You can influence the market to do certain things, to adopt, in this case, a certain technology, or to charge a certain price. Now, I can have some random games. The random game here, or a mixed strategy, would be one where there is no Nash equilibrium. Here, the application to this is, if you're the manager, how heavily do I want to monitor my employees? Do I want to track every key they touch on their keyboard, or do I just want to have an honor policy, for instance? Well, that's going to obviously, the outcomes here, we don't really know. Maybe sometimes the firm will decide to really watch what their employees are doing, right? And then they'll go a month where they don't. Or they'll just say, today is the day where we're going to watch what everyone's doing, and today is the days we're not. From the perspective of the worker, they don't know which day is going to be the day that everyone looks at what they're doing. Or, for instance, with the firm my wife works for, and we've probably all experienced this when we've called a helpline, for instance, or any sort of line, customer service line, is that you said you've been selected for a random survey afterwards. Well, right, that's kind of this as well, right? That the agent doesn't know which customer is going to choose to fill out the survey or not. And because they don't know that, then the workers are probably going to work very hard, yet the manager doesn't have to put forth a lot of an effort to monitor because they're not monitoring every call, they're only monitoring some calls. And we could see this type of game also occurring with unions. When it comes to unions, you could see these kinds of firms deciding to, all right, the union's trying to get as much money as possible, management doesn't want to give up as much as possible. And so then we could understand this three outcome strategy. We would want to get dominant strategies as well as what will the manager decide to do based on what they think the union will do. And this actually gets pretty cool too, because what if there are multiple unions? The interesting example we have here in the state of Hawaii, for instance, and the bargaining unit that I'm part of, I'm bargaining unit 7. Well, my bargaining unit decided they were going to get a better deal by bargaining at the same time as the other unions, which is not necessarily the case. I mean, if you think about this from a game theoretic standpoint, it actually might be good to follow up on everyone else, because then you know exactly what the outcome is going to be, because the state just negotiated with the other unions. Or maybe you bargain first. You get a really sweetheart deal, and then the state runs out of money for the other bargaining units, right? I mean, there is no guarantee of how to get the most money from, if you're the union, from your employer. I don't think it's necessarily the case. And this highlights it right here, that we actually have 3 equilibrium strategies depending on what management chooses and then the union chooses. And what matters in this case is that the game is being the simultaneous move game. Now, the game can also be repeated an infinite number of times. So instead of a one-shot game, which is what we've been looking at here, now let's talk about the games that are infinitely repeated. If the game is infinitely repeated, then what we see is that players, as they play the game each time, are going to be able to get revenge on someone that breaks a deal. They're going to be able to build up good favor with others. And then what I can do in terms of the payoffs, I have to think about each payoff in connection with the future outcomes it's going to generate. And those future outcomes do have to be discounted, because I'm not going to receive those benefits until the future. And that's just what they're doing here. They're just finding the present value, right, by looking at the opportunity cost of the money, the fact that it's not earned right away. So I'm reducing it by the interest rate. With these kinds of infinitely repeated games, we sometimes see a trigger strategy. And in that trigger strategy here, what we're saying is that firms may agree, may be able to be at this mutually better decision point, and they can do it when the game is played infinite number of times, because if someone tries to hurt me, then I will try to hurt them in some future game. It will trigger me to do something different. So then no player wants to do that because they know this game is going to be played multiple times. So what we see here in terms of the trigger strategy, and when we look at that in terms of what it produces in terms of competition, is it actually hurts competition. It's not that they're necessarily going to collude with each other, which is illegal, but it's going to produce collusive-like outcomes. And those collusive-like outcomes are going to be bad for us as consumers. Good for you as a manager, potentially, because it's going to mean that you can actually start to make money. But it might explain why, despite the fact that Target and Walmart do match each other's price, they generally charge rather similar prices that aren't necessarily the low price, but might be a mutually agreed upon high price. And they don't cheat on each other because they know that the next time they will face the consequences of not being able to be respected, at least, and have that kind of pricing power. So, and that's just what you see here. This is basically a slide that's talking about that reputation then that you're building. That if the game is played multiple times, an infinite number of times in the future, the trigger strategy then is going to be that I can punish those who break a agreement. Okay, I'm going to check my time here. Okay, I'm going to stop it right here, and then I'll make part 2.